It's Mark with you.
And Gar.
And we are coming to you live from the New Hampshire Liberty Forum here on Friday night. It will be going on tomorrow also. I believe Judge Napolitano is currently giving his speech. We're all missing it, but hey.
That's true. We sacrifice for you, the listener.
Absolutely. And we've been doing one interview after another here, and there's a guy in particular. Now, I've interviewed Charles Johnson. I have interviewed you previously on the Edgington Post, which is kind of a little thing I do on the podcast. But I haven't had you on Free Talk Live, and I wanted to make sure that we got you on because you kind of come from a different angle when it comes to liberty, and you speak now.
Sure. Well, so my name is Charles Johnson. I maintain a blog, the RadGeek People's Daily, at radgeek.com, and I'm a member of the Alliance of the Libertarian Left, is the major activist organization.
Now, I thought libertarians were really just the minor leagues for the Republicans.
That's the common view, and something that we're trying to get some challenge to.
And you've made the statement, and I'm not going to disagree with it, which is really unusual for me to disagree on something. You've made the statement that you believe that liberty is, in fact, that libertarianism is a left philosophy.
I agree, yeah.
Defend that! Defend it!
Very well. So, basically the idea here is that you have to look at sort of the history of these terms and how they came about. So left and right originally referred to the seating chart for the French National Assembly after the French Revolution. And on the right wing of the assembly, you had the monarchists, the conservatives, the people who believed that the power of the state was granted by God Almighty, and that the state could literally do no wrong because what they did was the definition of what was right.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Whereas on the left, you had the people who were the anti-authoritarians. In the middle left, you had sort of the liberals, the classical liberals, and as you got further out, people got more and more radical and more pro-freedom. So Frédéric Bastiat, the great free market economist, sat on the left, and so did Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, the great one of the first theorists to call himself an anarchist.
Now I've read a bit of Proudhon, somebody from the South. I've read a bit of him, and I found him confusing. I didn't find him to be very consistent.
Sure. Well, I think he is consistent. He just writes in a funky way. He's very influenced by Hegelian philosophy in a way that causes him to write in ways that are not necessarily entirely clear if you're not familiar with that tradition. But you get a sort of a follower of Proudhon named Benjamin Tucker in the United States, who I think really lays out these ideas in a way that's very clear and sort of lays out how it is that the left in particular, as he sees it and as I think Proudhon saw it also, is the real left-right spectrum is not a spectrum of like statists who want to bomb the hell out of you versus statists who want to send the EPA after you. And
right, but that's the dynamic that we get.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Because it's been hitched up to electoral politics in this particular way that you have sort of just two competing parties of statists that are trying to get these terms.
How did the left worldwide? How did the left get co-opted by the socialists?
Yeah.
Well, so that's a long story, and actually I think that's partly about how the socialists got co-opted by the statists. So somebody like Tucker would consider himself a socialist, but what he was into was voluntary socialism, which meant solidarity between workers, mutual aid networks, and that sort of thing, happening at a grassroots level apart from the state, so not being forced on people.
The stuff that Andrew Jackson supported with his Democratic Party, the Seminole Democratic Party.
Just the same sort of stuff that de Tocqueville noted when he came over in Democracy in America, the voluntarist notion. And you're right, it has been co-opted by the statists.
Right.
And so now if you talk to someone, they say, well, I'm a social anarchist. You say, well, really, you can't have socialism per se in a political definition as it has been established and have anarchy at the same time. They're not compatible within the state paradigm. But these guys, it was compatible.
Right. So you can't have state socialism, obviously, if you don't have a state, but you can have, de Tocqueville mentioned this, and there's a lot of really interesting history that some guys like Roderick Long and David Beto have talked about of sort of grassroots mutual aid networks. When you leave people free to do their own thing, and when you're not actually having government come in and give, multi-trillion-dollar bailouts to big corporations, what people actually form up freely are these much more sort of smaller human scale mutual aid networks and other kinds of grassroots institutions.
Which to me, Charles, is all part of the free market.
Yes.
It is the market.
Exactly.
You make your choices, you do things, whether it's for monetary compensation or for just the sentiment of helping your friend, and then you are faced with him later and he faces you and you end up reciprocating. That's the way it was done with all the different civic organizations, the Elks and all these things. And you clearly have an understanding of the names and the figures that came along. Do you have a difficult time re-educating people, deconstructing this? Is it worth deconstructing the term socialist today to say, look, a socialist is, in the early concept of it, a leftist was a person who believed in laissez-faire, who believed in markets? Or do you have to just say, you know what, I'm going to have to just drop that term. I'm a left libertarian. Socialism, I can't talk about it because it's been so corrupted.
Right. Yeah, well, that depends on the conversation and how much time you have and what kind of context. But I find it very useful often to challenge people on these words and to start conversations about it, because when people are confused about these words, there's usually a historical reason behind it. And I think that's true whether it's socialism you're talking about, or capitalism, or anarchism, or any number of other things. But when you use these terms and when you use them in a deliberately provocative way, so like I'll go around saying I'm a free market anti-capitalist, for example, and the reaction you get from people is huh, what do you mean by that?
Doesn't make much sense.
Yeah, but of course when they ask, huh, what do you mean by that? Why would you believe that? That gives you the opportunity to start talking about, well, there's this difference between big business and government privileged big business and free markets.
Do you think, Charles, that capitalism as it is known today and mercantilism as it was known in 1776 during Adam Smith's era are pretty much synonymous nowadays? For example, I have a lot of friends over in the UK. They're hardcore progressive statists.
Sure.
They believe in they don't believe in the sanctity of the individual. They want redistribution of wealth. So these guys would say, well, I hate capitalism. And I'll say, well, no, capitalism is good. What you don't like is mercantilism. Are we at a point now where Sheldon Richman even has said from Foundation for Economic Education, he says, I don't even know if it's worth bothering using the term capitalism anymore because capitalism is so synonymous with government involvement in the marketplace.
Yeah, and I think that's basically the way it plays out, is when you talk about capitalism, the thing that people will immediately move to is mercantilist privilege and sort of the existing patterns of big business that you see around you. Just sort of the economic system that we got, the way it works.
Yeah.
You can try and clarify, laissez-faire capitalism, free market capitalism, I'm just interested in private ownership of the means of production, etc. But I think that actually sort of challenging the attempt to identify free markets and capitalism in the first place does help clarify that markets can include a lot of things. Like what's in a market, that can include worker co-ops, that can include all kinds of things that are radically different from big corporations.
Now, the Alliance of the Libertarian Left, would that include folks that call themselves geo-libertarians? And what the heck is that?
There's a big question.
It does include some people who are into that sort of thing. I'm not into that sort of thing, so I can only do so much by way of trying to spell out. Like
Alliance, it sounds like a big tent.
Yeah, sure. It's a big tent, and it includes them because they also do put out a lot of good material on sort of corporate privilege and the way that that's been connected historically with government land grabs.
Yeah.
Historically that was things like colonial land grants and things like that. Nowadays it's through eminent domain and government redevelopment initiatives and that sort of thing.
And for people who aren't familiar with geo-libertarianism, these are all great terms. We could have such a great philosophical conversation.
Sure.
That term has been brought up a lot in our conversations, both on the show and over at my website at Liberty Conspiracy, about Muse, Matt Bellamy, geo-libertarian. And it all has to do with whether or not whether or not land can be considered to be private property, or it is all held in common, and you're just a renter, and you have to give something up to others to be able to use
some
it.
organization that will force you to give up the money, but it isn't government.
Exactly.
It's not government.
That's a tricky sort of thing. And some people have, like Murray Rothbard wrote about it, some people believe there should be a cyclical nature to it. You can get it, then you have to give it up. Very difficult. To me,
we call that death.
Yeah, to me, most of that doesn't really matter because you're still dealing with human beings. I don't know how you feel about it, Charles, but in my opinion, all of this stuff is academic because we can come up with our own agreements about how we're going to do it, and it's all based on the human, the nugget of individuality dealing with the other nugget of individuality and,
Sure.
and working it out themselves. That's common
Yeah.
law.
And one of the prominent writers within sort of ALL, this guy Kevin Carson, is not himself a geo-libertarian, but he's sort of very sympathetic to a lot of the things they're doing, and what he emphasizes is that these are things that can be worked out at a community level, and different communities may come to different conclusions.
People can read more of your stuff at?
RadGeek.com.
Excellent.
RadGeek.com.
That's
Thanks.
Charles Johnson.
Thanks, Charles.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Free Talk Live.